Chapter 4, Awful Grace. On April 4, 1968, Bobby Kennedy was getting ready to speak to a crowd of political supporters in Indianapolis, Indiana. As Kennedy was about to take the stage, a note was handed to him with the news Martin Luther King Jr. had just been killed. In breaking the news of this awful turn of events to those gathered, Kennedy lamented the beloved civil rights leader by quoting the Greek poet Aeschylus. "He who learns must suffer, and even in our sleep pain that cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, and even in our own despite against our will comes wisdom to us by the awful grace of God." Aeschylus penned those words more than 2,500 years ago. They came from his play Agamemnon, the first work in the Aresta trilogy. It's the story of how Agamemnon went to war to help his brother, the cuckolded Menelaus, recapture Helen, who had run off with a Trojan prince. To ensure victory and safe passage, Agamemnon sacrificed his daughter Iphigenia prior to the trip. This infanticide so incited Agamemnon's wife Clytemnestra that upon his victorious return from the war, she murdered him. With this telling of the insanities of war, revenge, murder, and adultery, Aeschylus helped to invent a whole new art form, dramatic tragedy. In the midst of the emotional chaos depicted in Agamemnon, Aeschylus's chorus poses those lines now made famous by Bobby Kennedy. Welcome to reality. At the heart of these beautifully disturbing words is the question, can anyone become wise without suffering? And the answer is a startling no. What Aeschylus is positing is no one can become truly wise, and I would add compassionate, without suffering. No one can become wise or compassionate without suffering. Somehow mysteriously, in the perceived god-awful alienation of those never-ending, pain-filled, sleepless nights, our souls can be sculpted into something more beautiful. Zen master D.T. Suzuki has observed, "For the more you suffer, the deeper grows your character. And with the deepening of your character, you read the more penetratingly into the secrets of life. All great artists, all great religious leaders, and all great social reformers have come out of the intensest struggles which they fought bravely, quite frequently in tears and with bleeding hearts. Unless you eat your bread in sorrow, you cannot taste of real life." Two profound observations by Suzuki help unpack the truth Aeschylus is pointing at. Suffering can enable us to live great lives, and the unique bread suffering has to offer is real life, reality. Without denying Alexander Hemon and the profound grief he's experienced, there is an alternate view to the role of suffering in our lives. Joseph Campbell, who made a career out of studying world religions and mythology, identified the nearly universal belief that suffering can be a doorway to heroic living. Campbell explained to Bill Moyers in their famous PBS interviews, "One thing that comes out in myths, for example, is that at the bottom of the abyss comes the voice of salvation. The black moment is the moment when the real message of transformation is going to come. At the darkest moment comes the light." The biblical author to the letter of Hebrews seems to agree by stating even Jesus of Nazareth was made perfect through suffering. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 10. How does suffering transform us? Well, by shattering the illusions we've either inherited or created and enabling us to see life as it really is. Living in reality is heroic living. During my work as a minister, I've discovered another benefit of living in reality. It is there that we're most likely to bump into God. Christian theology has for centuries affirmed the belief that God is everywhere all the time. This concept, called omnipresence, is based in large part on the lines from Psalm 139, "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there." But I suggest there is one place in which God does not exist: in our fantasies. Because in our fantasies, we are God. I suggest the real God does not dwell in unreality. And if we hope to encounter the living Creator, the only place this can occur is in reality. But suffering alone does not provide such an awakening. Suffering provides the environment, the fertile soil for spiritual growth. As Alexander Heman and others would attest, suffering does not guarantee an awakening. Something more is required: awful grace. I suggest it is the awful grace that shatters our illusions, awakening us to reality where we can truly experience the holy other. Now, awful grace is not something different from amazing grace. They're two sides of the same coin. Amazing grace is the experience of acceptance from the beloved that encourages us to trust this divine other, even as awful grace painfully shatters our illusions and fantasies to awaken us to truth. The result is that we can begin to live more heroic lives graced with wisdom and compassion. Grace is not only amazing and awful, sometimes it's just plain annoying. Annoying because if grace is anything, it's personal, intimately personal. Another cause of annoyance is it comes in its own sweet time. All this screaming in the world won't hurry it up one bit. I've tried. But what's probably most annoying is you can't earn it. It just shows up. Yes, it's liberating. Yes, it gives birth to hope. But it also requires change. Grace requires I trust in God's loving acceptance and quit acting like a frightened little child. Maybe Anne Lamott puts it most succinctly: I do not understand the mystery of grace, only that it meets us where we are, but it does not leave us where it found us. Tragic heroes. During my training to become a chaplain, one of the more formative books I read was written by a pediatrician, Margaret Moorman. In Medicine as Ministry, she wisely observes that a patient's receiving a correct diagnosis is important, but what is more important is for caregivers to recognize that this is a human being to whom a terrible thing is happening, and whatever other name this terrible thing bears, its name is tragedy. Dr. Moorman goes on to say that we are all heroes in our own tragic stories, tragic in the dramatic sense. A dramatic tragedy starts with a character who's flawed, as we all are, yet exists in a relative state of harmony before all hell breaks loose. Events push the character to his or her physical and emotional limits, yet once the difficulty is overcome, the character is left in a much more balanced state of peace. Having experienced the tragedy enables the hero to become a wiser, more compassionate human being. And the hero is not the only one affected. For example, Petey was the hero of his story, and I was just a bit player. But like all great tragedies, even the bit players and audience members can be changed by them. C.S. Lewis illustrates this experience of awful grace masterfully in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader from the Chronicles of Narnia series. There was a boy called Eustace Clarence Scrubb, and he almost deserved it. Lewis begins the story. Eustace is a spoiled, priggish little boy who's demanding and patronizing to all of his companions. When the Dawn Treader harbors at a small island, instead of joining the company to help forage for food or firewood, Eustace goes off in search of fun. Stumbling upon the lair of a dragon, he discovers a den full of priceless treasures. Motivated by greed, Eustace steals a beautiful bracelet and puts it on his arm. But later, after he's fallen asleep, he awakens to discover that he magically has been turned into a dragon himself. As a dragon, Eustace terrifies all of his traveling companions, even though he tries very hard to make nice. The frightened little boy is liberated from the dragon experience only by the intervention of the lion, Aslan, the Christ-like character. Here's how the boy recounts his transformation as the great lion used his claws of awful grace to tear away the dragon's skin. The very first tear he made was so deep that I thought it had gone right into my heart. And when he began pulling the skin off, it hurt worse than anything I've ever felt. The only thing that made me able to bear it was just the pleasure of feeling the stuff peeled off. You know, like if you've ever picked the scab off a sore place, it hurts like billy-o, but it is so much fun to see it come away. Well, he peeled the beastly stuff right off, just as I thought I'd done it myself the other 3 times, only they hadn't hurt. And there it was lying on the grass, ever so much thicker and darker and more knobbly looking than all the others had been. And there was I, smooth and soft as a peeled switch and smaller than I'd ever been. Then he caught hold of me. I didn't like that much, for I was very tender underneath now that I'd had no skin on. And he threw me into the water. It smarted like anything, but only for a moment. After that, it became perfectly delicious, and as soon as I started swimming and splashing, I found that all the pain had gone from my arm. And then I saw why. I'd turned into a boy again. As Lewis so beautifully illustrates, God's amazing grace is also awful, because God's merciful work of liberating us from our false selves often hurts like hell. Like Eustace Clarence Scrubb, we've all created false selves presenting ourselves to the world, hiding the frightened little child aching for acceptance underneath. Many philosophers and theologians have observed that the crafting of this false self is a universal response to the fears and wounds of life. We create elaborate masks made out of what we know, whom we know, how much money and power we wield, all to hide our true selves. Like Adam and Eve in the archetypal story from the book of Genesis, we're frightened. So we hide from God, from one another, and from ourselves. In this state, we live shallow, hypocritical lives. In fact, the word hypocrite derives from the ancient Greek theatrical term for one who wears a mask. This unmasking of one's true self is almost always painful, but it is also the only way to experience authentic relationships with God, one another, and ourselves. Awful grace is the means whereby God frees us from this masked false self, freeing us to live in reality. Like Eustace, we wake up to discover we're acting like dragons, and we begin to ache for liberation, hence amazing, awful grace. Joseph Campbell adds a wonderful insight about dragons from his study of mythology. The dragon of our Western tales, he says, tries to collect and keep everything to himself. In his secret cave, he guards things, heaps of gold, and perhaps a captured virgin. He doesn't know what to do with either, so he just guards and keeps. There are people like that, and we call them creeps. They just glue themselves to you and hang around and try to suck out of you their life. The amazing, awful grace of God comes to help us become less creepy and more human. Grace can liberate us from the greedy dragon of our false selves and enable us to become wiser, more compassionate people. But as Aeschylus warns, this awful grace usually comes to us against our wills. Against our wills, because given our druthers, we would all rather decline this life-changing experience.